and welcome to this episode, the 50th one of the Women Talking About Learning podcast. I'm Andrew Jacobs. And yes, we've made it to 50 episodes. I never would have thought in September 2020, I think it was, that we would ever achieve this, but there we go. If you're interested in numbers, we've had a total of about 10,000 downloads. We've just gone over 100 guests on the podcast as well. And we've been in a number of charts as well. We chart fairly regularly in the Philippines for some reason, but also the UK, Australia, Netherlands and Canada. People have asked which episodes are the most listened to, and they are the top 5 in reverse order. The Teams one, the Neuroscience one, the Lifelong Learning one, the Voiceover one, and by a mile, the most listened to episode is the Imposter Syndrome one. I have favourites, but I wanted to ask the people who listen and contribute to the podcast to say what they thought about it. So we asked people to send in clips and audio like we have done before, and we've put them together for this week's episode. As always, we don't make any edits except to clean the sound up a little bit. This is Women Talking About Learning. This is Lior, Gemma, Michelle, Miriam, Natalie, Shannon and Sharon talking about this podcast.
Hi everyone, this is Lior Locher. I am a contributor but also listener to the Women Talking About Learning podcast. What I'm getting out of it is essentially in 1 or 2 words: siblinghood, sisterhood, the feeling like I'm not alone, because people tell stories and you're cheering them on, you're face palming along with them along the lines of, oh my god, they didn't, did they? Oh god, they did. You know, that kind of a thing. And I just think it's amazing. It helps me feel like I'm not alone, like there are others like me out there. Some of it is also quite frankly outrageous, so I feel like I can join in to the fight and I'm not alone in that either. And it's just really enriching, and everybody has stories to tell, everybody's on top of their game and knows a lot of stuff, and that just gives me a lot of hope for the future, really.
Happy 50th episode. I'm Gemma Patterson. My experience of listening to the Women Talking About Learning podcast is that it's brilliant to hear about those shared experiences. That's been a bit of a lifeline to me over the various stages of the pandemic. Just knowing that there's a community of other people out there facing similar challenges and who are really ready to support each other and open sharing their advice has been magic. The podcast also highlighted to me some blind spots that I've got as a woman in learning. It's really shown me that inclusion's about intersections of what makes us all so different, and that it sort of made me realise as well that my experience isn't just based on my gender, it's about all those different facets that have made me who I am. And it's great to hear that diversity of experience come through in the podcast. My favourite episodes, I think the hallmark of the Women Talking About Learning podcast is that it's really authentic and people are really open and, you know, sometimes pretty vulnerable on it as well. And this runs through pretty much every episode of the podcast. Some of the ones that have really stood out for me was the confidence episode. Really absolutely loved that one. I think the misogyny one with Dr. Hannah Gore and Laurie Niles Hoffman, really amazing episode, sort of talking about their experiences and how they dealt with that and what their advice was. I also love being part of the Imposter Syndrome episode and making a contribution of my own experience of that there. In terms of my favourite guests, I think the conference one had some of my favourite guests. It was a bit of a fangirl moment for me. I'm a really big fan of the work that Dana James Edwards shares through her social media channels, her thinking. So it was great to hear from her. Great to hear from Rita Sucrit and Kate Graham on there as well. And it offered a really good insight, I thought, into the behind the scenes workings of conferences, which make up such a huge part of our industry, and really showed how people can create opportunities for themselves and for each other. I've also really loved the contributions of Lior Locher and Ash Sinclair. I think they both have really different ways of thinking about the world, and it's been brilliant to hear those perspectives. In terms of what I'd like to hear next, I'd quite like to hear the perspectives of some of our audience, so the people in the organisations that we work with and for. It'd be great to hear from them on what it feels like to be on the receiving end of some of the stuff that we create. We do a lot of insights work in my organisation, but it'd be great to sort of hear those perspectives from others too. Be good to explore how our experiences as women are translating into things that we create. So, there might be a room for the audience one yet. We'll see. And here's to the next 50.
I'm Michelle Kay, and I've been a fan of the podcast from the very beginning. You may have heard me before, as I was a speaker on one of the early episodes, as well as adding my voice and thoughts to the imposter syndrome one. As a fan, while I've enjoyed listening to all of them, my favourite, so far, has been the visual design one. I learnt so much from Meg and Cassie that I found them both online to connect with while I was listening to the recording. With each and every episode, I learned something new, from backgrounds to current thinking, views and experiences that I've never thought of. As a speaker, I was paired with my good friend Joe Cook for the Delivering Online one. I'll be honest, it's the only one I haven't listened to. We recorded via Zoom, with Andrew checking that we were all okay before disappearing from the screen and leaving us to it. It was just two friends chatting about a favourite subject. I know other speakers have mentioned it before, but Andrew really does leave us alone to talk about learning and the episode topic. We did have a single question from him via the chat, but I remember misreading it and then speaking it out loud and trying to answer it. It's been a privilege to be part of this podcast, and I look forward to listening to many more episodes of women talking about learning, and perhaps being a speaker again.
When Andrew asked me to appear on one of his episodes, initially I found it quite daunting. It's quite strange though, because I don't normally have issues talking to people and having conversations, yet when there is this big mic in front of me, it makes things tricky. But I was made to feel quite at ease pretty quickly, and I'd like to think that we had a good conversation, so I would thoroughly recommend it. I can't quite pick my favourite episode. There were quite a few, but one that I remember vividly was the one with women talking about confidence. And I think the reason I remember it is because every story was different. The way confidence appears and feels like to different women was very distinct, yet I was able to relate to all of them, and some of those stories could have been mine. So I really appreciated that this episode was made, because it was very reassuring and a great listen. And I know it is about women talking about stuff, but I did wonder, what would men answer to that question?
I'm Natalie Ann Holbrook and I work for Thinky. So I started there as an instructional designer and now I work in the marketing department. Knowing Andrew already as a person who really amplifies women's voices meant that my experience of recording the marketing episode with both Andrew and the other guest, Manya Horner, was as enjoyable as it was insightful. I generally learned as much as I shared in that, minus the usual nerves that can get in the way. As a listener, there's a lot of episodes I could choose from, but I think the one I'm going to go for here is the lifelong learning one with Sharon Green and Miriam Nealon. It raised some really interesting questions for me around social backgrounds and education, how this changes our perception of lifelong learning, and why we've got to keep considering the level of access people have to these opportunities. With that in mind, I think the next one I'd like to hear more about is creating these equal and accessible learning opportunities and what part we play in this. Where did gender, class and access to learning opportunities come into play? The inclusivity one was another good one, and this touched upon some of these important subjects. And it's something I think we need to keep hearing more of, because it's an issue that's not going to go away, and we need to hear it just from different perspectives, people from different walks of life. And I might be biased in this one, but I'd really love to hear some more around marketing and engagement in L&D too, because there's so much more that we can talk about beyond that episode in terms of creating an L&D brand, raising awareness of learning opportunities, and measuring some of these activities too. It's really great to see this podcast reach its 50th episode. They're all topics that need to be talked about. They're all voices that need to be heard. And Andrew really is a role model in that he doesn't just talk about amplifying these voices, he actively goes and does it. I'm fully looking forward to more of this in future.
Hi there, Shannon Tipton, owner of Learning Rebels. And when Andrew asked me to put together a short little audio snip to help celebrate the 50th episode of Women Talking About Learning, how can I resist that? First off, congratulations, Andrew. Secondly, about the Women in Learning podcast. Typically, I avoid conversations where we pit one gender against the other. Now, the approach that Andrew takes for his podcast is not one of being the savior of women in learning. It's one of supporting women in learning. And this I can celebrate because the conversations highlight brilliant women, their thoughts, their actions, the way they approach learning and development. I especially can appreciate the podcast about confidence, part 1 and part 2, displaying where we are as women and how we have grown and how we have captured our strength and captured our confidence and captured our curiosity, all of the things that make us unique to being women, and pushed them into the L&D field to lift it, to make it better, and to provide inspiration. This is something that Andrew has done, and he's done this for women, not for himself. This is something to be celebrated. And when it comes to supporting women supporting each other, I think this is how we lift each other. This is how we lift the industry, and this is how we drive the industry forward. So I look forward to future podcasts, episodes coming from Andrew. And Andrew, clink, here's to another 50 more.
Hi, I'm Sharon Green, and this is my contribution, I hope, to the 50th episode of the Women Talking About Learning podcast. I wanted to say how I got involved and why I got involved. When I heard this was kicking off and that Andrew was pulling this together, I immediately said yes, that I wanted to be a guest. I'm not a regular guest on lots of podcasts, but for me this was a complete no-brainer. I believe in what it's trying to achieve. I like the concept. I just would have been willing to talk about quite a number of topics in order to put my full support behind it. In the end, my recording was on lifelong learning, where I met for the very first time Miriam Neelam, and that was a conversation that just kind of blew my mind, really. We talked about lots of things. It felt like it flowed naturally. I did hardly any prep that actually meant anything on the day, because the conversation flowed and it took us in all sorts of directions that I never anticipated. So it was an absolute joy to connect. And one of the things that I've found from contributing is I've just said yes or thrown my hat into the ring, and I've enjoyed listening, supporting as well as contributing, and I've only done a couple of contributions. The things that I wanted to mention specifically were that I've enjoyed your company, the people, the women, the conversations, as I've walked around the neighbourhood during COVID and post-COVID. I've enjoyed hearing new voices, people that I don't always hear from, new voices, different ones from around the globe, and that's what I found really powerful. I wanted to give a special shout out to a few things that I remember. I want to say thank you to Dana, who I listened to on the conference one, and her joy at knowing that you could just ask to be a guest on these things, which I never knew, I have to say. I thought all of these awards and guests and things that happen, people just get asked rather than them asking. So that was kind of mind-blowing to me. I also wanted to give a big shout out to all of the contributors to the imposter syndrome one. That was a really powerful listen for me. And there were so many more. I've listened to practically all of them, although I am slightly behind. What would I want to hear next? Oh gosh, I just want to say, surprise me. I know that's a real cop-out, but I enjoy the variety of these podcasts, and I think that the community and Andrew and all of the listeners probably have a lot of things that they have on their mind, and I'm hoping to contribute and to talk about something that's very near and dear to my heart: interim, being an interim and what the heck that means. So I'm hoping that I get another chance to be on with a whole group of interim buddies that can talk about the wide variety of that experience. Watch this space.
Watch this space indeed. We are incredibly humbled by the comments that people have made. This podcast has been a brilliant learning experience, and having the opportunity to learn audio skills was great. But more importantly, learning how people trusted to create a space where they can speak and engage has been amazing. This podcast was established to amplify women's voices, and it seems to be doing that a little at least. I'm hearing of organisations who get how voices should now be balanced. However, as a political party comms lead once told me, when you're sick of the message, having spoken about it for weeks and months, you've incorporated it into everything you say and everything you produce, and you've run out of ways to say it, that is when people are just beginning to get the message. We do have more episodes recorded and more scheduled, so please like and subscribe to Women Talking About Learning on your podcast player. It really does help people find us. And, as always, if you would like to record, please do get in touch. We're always looking for people who want to share their stories. Take care, and we'll see you again soon.